Growing up, one of my mom's signature desserts was her homemade fudge. Her chocolate fudge was so fudgy. Her peanut butter fudge was so creamy. It was perfect. Well, when my husband became diagnosed with diabetes a few years back, I had to figure out a way to get that same creamy, fudgy, yummy taste and texture into my fudge without adding all those extra carbs and extra sugars. Well, I'm happy to say I have found a way, and I'm going to share it with you today. Our recipes today are for chocolate fudge and peanut butter fudge that is low carb, sugar-free, diabetic friendly, gluten free, keto friendly, so anybody can eat it. So good. And if you want printable versions of these, then check out my website at janetsdeliciouslowcarbkitchen.com. You can find printable versions of these and other goodies there for you. And if you're new to this channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to hit the little notification bell, then you can be notified every time I put out a new video. And while you do that, let's get cooking. For the chocolate fudge, in a medium saucepan, add 1 cup of water and 1 1/4 cups of monk fruit sweetener or sweetener of your choice. Whisk these together just until the sweetener is wet. Doesn't have to be fully 100% combined, you just want the sweetener wet. Bring it to a low boil over medium heat. Once it's come to a low boil, it just has to have some bubbles around the edges. Then reduce the heat to medium-low and boil it for 10 minutes. You want to make sure that sweetener gets nice and dissolved. You don't need to stir it at all while it boils. Just let it get hot and let those granules of the sweetener dissolve completely. While that's boiling, in a medium mixing bowl, whisk together 4 cups of powdered milk or powdered milk substitute. If you're going strict keto, powdered milk is not on the keto diet, but they do have powdered coconut milk and other powdered milk alternatives that will work just as well, and a 1/2 cup of pure cocoa powder. Whisk them together until they're fully combined and there's no lumps. Sometimes the cocoa powder can bunch up on you, so just make sure you really whisk it good so there's no lumps in it and the cocoa and powdered milk is fully combined together. Set the bowl aside. Lightly grease an 8 by 8 inch baking dish. Make sure you grease the bottoms and the sides because you don't want the fudge to stick. Once you're done greasing it, then set it aside. Check on your sugar and water mixture. Make sure it's at a nice simmer. It doesn't have to be rapidly boiling, but it does need to be simmering. So once it's done boiling for 10 minutes, then carefully add 14 tablespoons of butter. I usually cut the butter up into cubes before I place it in. It helps it to melt faster and more smooth. Just when you do drop them into the water, make sure you're being careful because it does splash. You don't want to splash boiling water on yourself. So make sure you just do it a few cubes at a time, slowly and carefully. Give it a gentle stir just to get the cubes a little bit damp. They don't have to be soaking wet. Just give them a little stir so a little bit of the hot water can get onto it. Then bring the mixture to a low boil. Once it's come to a low boil, again, give it a little stir to make sure all the butter is melted. Remove from the heat and slowly add your powdered milk mixture. Make sure you go slowly and gradually because you don't want it to shower all over the place. So slowly and gradually, and whisk it while you're pouring it, slowly and gently, so again, you don't make a mess. Once all the powdered sugar and cocoa mixture is incorporated, then add 1 teaspoon of vanilla and whisk it all together really well until it's fully blended and smooth. You want to get it as smooth as possible. It might take a little bit of elbow grease sometimes, but Make sure you get it nice and smooth. You don't want any large granules inside your fudge. So nice and smooth. Pour it into the prepared baking dish. Use a spatula and smooth the top. Make sure you get it nice and even all the way across. You don't want to have one side of your fudge nice and tall and the other side flat. So make sure you get it as even as possible. And let it cool at room temperature 1 to 3 hours or until it's cool and nice and firm. You want to be able to put a knife through it and cut it into nice squares without it falling apart and without it being gooey in the middle. So make sure you really let it cool good before you try to cut it. Once it's cooled and firm to the touch, then cut it into the desired size. Make sure when you cut it into the squares, you cut with a nice sharp knife and you go slowly. You don't want the edges of the fudge to crumble and get all flaky. It's okay if it has a little bit of flake to it. That's okay. That lets you know that it's nice and firm. But you don't want it to crumble. So slow and steady is good. When it comes to baking and cooking of any kind, slow and steady is good. So cut them into the squares of your desired proportion. Serve them immediately on a serving platter or store it in an airtight container until you're ready to eat it. I usually store it on my countertop at room temperature if I know that it's going to be eaten within 3 days. If it's not going to be eaten within 3 days, then store it in the refrigerator. That way it doesn't get soft. You want to make sure it has that nice firm texture. For the peanut butter fudge, in a medium saucepan over medium heat, combine 1 1/4 cup butter that's been cut into cubes. Again, make sure it's cubed, that way it melts easier and more smooth. And 1 1/2 cups of creamy peanut butter. Now, I usually make my own peanut butter, but if you are buying it from the store, make sure you read the labels. All that should be on your peanut butter is peanuts and maybe a little bit of oil. There should not be a bunch of added sugars or anything else added to it. So really make sure you read those labels so you know that you are getting 100% natural, pure peanut butter. Once the butter begins to melt, then stir your peanut butter and butter together. Once the butter's nice and melted, then stir it together with the peanut butter until it's fully combined. Make sure all of the butter is nice and melted and nice and smooth. Then cook it for 3 to 5 minutes or just until bubbles begin to form around the edges of the peanut butter. It does not have to come to a massive rapid boil. So make sure you just keep it on that medium heat just until it just barely starts to come to a bubbly boil. While the peanut butter and butter are melting, in a large mixer bowl, whisk together 4 cups of powdered swerve or powdered sweetener of your choice. Make sure you whisk it good because powdered sweeteners tend to bunch up and clump together. So make sure you whisk it really good so it's nice and fluffy and there's not any big lumps in it. Set the bowl aside. Check back on your peanut butter and butter mixture. Make sure it's all nice and melted together and that it has those nice little bubbles around it. Turn off the heat and stir in a 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1 1/2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Whisk it all together and make sure it's nice and smooth and make sure the salt granules are nice and dissolved. They should dissolve pretty much immediately, but make sure you whisk that together really good so that the vanilla gets fully distributed and everything's nice and creamy and nice and smooth together. Then pour it over the powdered swerve that's in your mixing bowl. And use a spatula or a large wooden spoon and mix it all together till it's nice and smooth. You don't want any chunks of powdered sweetener, so really make sure you get in there and make it nice and smooth. Takes a little bit of elbow grease because it can get a little thick, but it's supposed to get that way. So make sure you mix it really well. Make sure it gets nice and smooth and creamy. Lightly spray an 8 by 8 inch baking dish. Once you've mixed it and it's nice and creamy, then pour the mixture into the prepared baking dish. Use a spatula and smooth out the top. Make sure it's nice and smooth, that there's no indentions, and make sure that it is even all the way around. You don't want a thick piece of fudge and then a thin piece of fudge. So nice and smooth all the way around and on top. Cover it lightly with plastic wrap and place it in the fridge for 1 to 3 hours, just enough to get it nice and firm. Again, you don't want it overly hard, because if you get it too hard, when you try to cut it, it's going to flake everywhere. So 1 to 3 hours, or until it's firm enough to get a knife through it without it being gooey or hot in the middle. Once it's firmed up really well, remove it from the refrigerator, unwrap it, then cut it into your desired sizes. I would suggest cutting these into small cubes. These are really rich. They're so good, but they are really rich. So I would suggest cutting them into small cubes, but it's up to you on how much you think you're gonna want of it. So cut it into your desired size and serve it immediately, or place it in an airtight container and store it in your refrigerator. You don't want to store this at room temperature because it tends to get soft, so you want to store this in the refrigerator. When you're ready to eat it, it's always best to let it come up to room temperature before you eat it. That way it doesn't flake or fall apart on you. So store it in your refrigerator, but make sure you bring it to room temperature before you eat it. And there you have it. Low carb, sugar-free, gluten-free, keto-friendly peanut butter fudge and chocolate fudge. Eat and enjoy. And those are our recipes of the day. I hope you enjoyed them both. If you did, hit the like and the subscribe button. Leave me a comment if you want to. Let me know if there's any recipes that you'd like to learn how to make, and I'll do what I can to get those out there for you. And as always, keep cooking.